Today, we're going to break down the absolutely stunning fall of a music titan. This is the story of Sean Diddy Combs, and how he went from the very top of the world to a federal courtroom facing accusations that would completely tear down the empire he spent decades building.
And to really get a feel for this, we've got to start with a moment from the trial that just, well, it blew people away. This quote from attorney Adante Pointer. It perfectly sums up the massive, high-stakes gamble that Diddy's defense team decided to take.
So how did it even get to that point in the courtroom? Well, it all started right here. This single document, the official federal indictment, is what kicked off a legal war that would completely grip the nation and, honestly, shock the world.
To really grasp how big this fall was, you have to understand just how high he climbed. I mean, how did one of the biggest icons in music history end up in this position? For decades, Sean Combs wasn't just a name. He was a force of nature, right? Under his label Bad Boy Records, he built this incredible empire. He worked with literally everyone, the Notorious B.I.G., Mariah Carey, Usher. By every measure, he was on top of the world. But, behind all that glitz and glamour, behind the success, a completely different story was starting to bubble to the surface, one that would end up dismantling his entire public image, piece by painful piece.
It all kicked off with one single lawsuit in November 2023 from his former partner, the singer Cassie Ventura. Now, they settled that pretty fast, but it was like opening the floodgates. The accusations just started pouring in, and then, only a few months later, you see federal agents raiding his mansions.
But the real turning point? It was this. CNN got their hands on this just incredibly disturbing hotel surveillance video from back in 2016. For the first time, the public saw with their own eyes the kind of violence that was being described in these lawsuits. It was a visual confirmation that was just impossible to ignore. Combs did eventually issue an apology. By September of 2024, that initial wave of accusations, it had turned into a full-blown tsunami. We're talking more than 120 different people had come forward to file lawsuits against him, each with their own story of alleged misconduct and abuse.
Okay, so with this many people coming forward, federal prosecutors started seeing something bigger. They weren't just seeing a bunch of individual crimes anymore. They were seeing a pattern. They were seeing an entire organization. And that's where the federal indictment really comes into play.
Just listen to the first line of the indictment. It really sets a powerful stage for how the government was looking at this. They weren't just charging him with specific acts. No, they were accusing him of running a criminal organization, one that was designed for abuse and for hiding it all, using his own businesses as the vehicle. Now, to get a handle on the most serious charge they threw at him, you got to understand something called the RICO Act. Think of it like this. It's the same powerful law they originally created to take down the mafia. Prosecutors were using it here to argue that Combs' companies and his whole inner circle were basically operating as a criminal enterprise.
And according to the prosecutors, this Combs enterprise wasn't about making hit records. No, they laid out its real purposes right there in the indictment. It was all about fulfilling Combs' personal desires, holding on to his power, and making sure everyone around him was absolutely loyal no matter what it took. And right at the heart of the government's case were these events they labeled freak-offs. The indictment paints this really dark picture of these highly planned sex parties where victims were allegedly drugged and forced to perform with sex workers, all while Combs recorded everything. So the charges are filed, Combs is in custody, the stage was set. In May of 2025, what was being called one of the most anticipated trials in years finally began, and you better believe the media was watching every single second. And inside that courtroom, you had two completely different realities being presented. The prosecution story was that Combs trapped his victims in a golden cage, using all that luxury and glamour as a weapon of coercion. The defense? They painted a picture of scorned lovers and angry ex-employees who were just out for money.
But the emotional center of the whole prosecution, that was Cassie Ventura's testimony. For 4 incredibly tough days, she was on the stand, detailing a decade of abuse she says she suffered at his hands. She was giving the jurors a first-hand look inside that golden cage.
And it wasn't just her. The government brought in a whole parade of witnesses, 34 of them in fact. You had other accusers, former security guards, members of his staff, and even the rapper Kid Cudi, who testified that Combs had his car firebombed. And then, after all of that, the defense did something that made everyone's jaw drop. They just rested. They didn't call a single person to the stand. Their entire strategy was this huge gamble, to just argue that the prosecution, despite everything, simply hadn't proven their case beyond a reasonable doubt.
So after nearly 2 months of absolutely explosive testimony, it was all over. All the arguments were made, the case was now in the hands of the jury.
And for 3 long days, the world just waited. Everyone was holding their breath as that jury of 8 men and 4 women finally walked back into the courtroom on July 2nd, 2025 with their decision.
And this is what they came back with. The official verdict sheet from the court, laying it all out, charge by charge. It was a mixed bag, a split verdict. On the huge charges, the big ones, like RICO conspiracy and sex trafficking, the jury said not guilty. But they did find him guilty on 2 counts of transportation for prostitution, which is a violation of something called the Mann Act.
Now, even though he dodged the biggest bullets, this conviction is still incredibly serious. He was immediately denied bail, and he's still in federal custody right now. And those 2 guilty counts? They mean he's facing a potential prison sentence of 15 years to life.
And that leaves us with this final, really wild thought. Reports are already swirling that Combs' legal team is exploring the possibility of a presidential pardon. It just makes you wonder, is this really the end of the story? Or could the final chapter depend not on a jury, but on who's in the White House? This is the Resonance Channel. Comment what you think about it all.